The United States electrical grid is entering its most expensive phase of reconstruction in a century. As infrastructure reaches the end of its lifespan and states implement carbon-free mandates, the price of new transmission and generation is climbing. This chart shows how those construction costs are translating to the public. In Minnesota, the red line represents utility arrears, money owed by residents who cannot pay their bills, which has now crossed the $100 million mark. When those bills go unpaid, the consequences are physical. In 2024, utilities disconnected over 91,000 Minnesota households for non-payment, a record high. The primary defense against these price hikes is the Public Utility Commission, or PUC. This agency traces its origins to the 1870s, when the state first began regulating the monopolies that controlled railroads and grain warehouses. Today, the PUC manages the regulatory compact. This is a legal agreement where a utility receives an exclusive monopoly and a guaranteed profit on its investments in exchange for providing safe, reliable service at just and reasonable rates. During a multi-billion-dollar energy transition, the PUC must rigorously audit utility spending. If they fail to enforce the compact, the sudden jump in rates will undermine the financial stability of residential households. To measure this impact, regulators look at the energy burden. This is the specific percentage of a household's annual income spent on electricity, heating, and cooling. Most economists consider an energy burden between 4 and 6% to be the sustainable limit. When costs exceed 6%, households are often forced to choose between paying for power or buying food and medicine. This pressure is most acute in rural areas, where energy burdens are 42% higher than in cities. Rural residents deal with lower population densities and a reliance on delivered fuels like propane, which can cost nearly $1,000 to refill. Traditionally, energy assistance focused on winter heating. However, the majority of utility shutoffs now occur between June and September, right as winter cold water protections expire and summer temperatures spike. In the Twin Cities, average summer cooling demand has increased 43% since the early 1980s. This shift has made summer cooling a requirement for physical health. To address this, states are expanding programs like LIHEAP, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, to provide year-round grants for vulnerable households. A utility's primary way to increase its revenue is through a formal rate case. This is a legal audit where the PUC scrutinizes a utility's request to raise prices, ensuring that only necessary and prudent costs are passed on to customers. Utilities can bypass immediate oversight using interim rates. Within 60 days of filing a case, a utility can increase rates based on a statutory formula before any regulators have approved the request. These interim rates function as a forced, low-interest loan from the public. While pending, ratepayers provide cash flow for unauthorized investments. Once audited, the PUC filters out unjustifiable costs. If the final rate is lower, the utility must refund the difference. In recent years, this auditing process has shaved over $1 billion off utility rate requests, acting as a direct brake on monopolistic spending. While base rates are rising, high energy efficiency standards in some states have kept consumption low. As a result, the average residential bill in these areas has actually declined relative to inflation. Lower consumption helps, but the formal rate case remains the only structural barrier preventing utilities from inflating their capital budgets at the public's expense. Regulators must also manage the physical constraints of the wires. The local distribution grid is facing unprecedented congestion as more power sources attempt to connect to a system designed for one-way flow. The surge in distributed energy, like rooftop solar, creates physical bottlenecks on neighborhood circuits that were built decades before homeowners began generating their own power. The PUC is now implementing statewide standards to share the costs of grid upgrades fairly between utilities and the developers of these local energy projects. They are also mandating the use of grid-enhancing technologies, or GETs. These are hardware sensors and software packages that allow a utility to squeeze more power through existing transmission lines. By monitoring line temperatures and wind conditions in real time, these sensors allow utilities to flexibly route power, alleviating congestion without building entirely new towers. Optimizing existing wires allows the state to delay physical build-outs that would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, costs that ratepayers would ultimately have to fund. A new challenge to ratepayer protection has emerged in the form of hyperscale data centers. These facilities represent the single most concentrated electrical demand a local grid can face. Tech companies frequently use non-disclosure agreements during negotiations with local governments, often keeping the true grid impact of a facility hidden until after the deal is signed. When a massive data center connects, it traditionally sends a cost shockwave through the rates paid by every residential customer. To prevent this, new legislation isolates these costs. A tariff wall ensures the heavy investments are paid only by the data centers themselves. These electric service agreements now require tech firms to physically and financially fund their own dedicated grid upgrades. Lawmakers are also leveraging these projects for public benefit, requiring data center operators to invest millions into low-income weatherization as a condition for connecting to the grid. These targeted tariffs ensure that as the tech sector expands, the general public is not forced to subsidize private corporate infrastructure. Reaching a 100% carbon-free grid by 2040 requires more than just utility-scale wind and solar. It requires a decentralized network of specialized power nodes that can supplement the main grid. One example is the anaerobic digester. This technology uses large vessels and bacteria to break down municipal food waste, capturing methane for renewable natural gas. This process reduces landfill waste and creates a secondary market for agricultural biochar, a charcoal-like material made from organic solids that is used to enrich soil and store carbon. Biomass plants are also used as a dual-purpose tool. They provide steady electricity while disposing of wood infested by the emerald ash borer, an invasive insect that has killed millions of trees. These plants process tens of thousands of tons of infested wood waste, incinerating the chips to generate both industrial heat and electricity for the grid. Elsewhere, cities are installing large-scale geothermal systems, like the one at the Como Zoo, to replace 40-year-old gas boilers with carbon-free groundwater heating. These localized projects solve municipal waste and ecological problems while providing the decentralized generation needed for a more resilient power system. To manage these decentralized sources, engineers use microgrids. A microgrid is a self-contained energy system that can disconnect from the main grid during a failure to keep local power flowing. Research facilities like the Center for Microgrid Research at the University of St. Thomas model how these systems interact with the grid before they are deployed in the real world. These systems use battery storage and smart inverters, converting DC power to AC power to instantly balance supply and demand. Without this rigorous testing, the transition to local energy would be too volatile for the existing electrical grid to handle. Implementing decentralized technology, from waste digesters to server farms, is only the first step toward the 2040 mandate. The state's regulatory framework must adapt just as quickly to finance this physical transition without bankrupting the households it serves. Success in the carbon-free era relies on cost allocation, shielding the vulnerable, auditing monopoly spending, and ensuring the highest demand pay for their own way.